The dim light of the setting sun filtered through the thin curtains, casting long shadows across the modest kitchen. Laura sat alone at the table, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the worn wood grain, as if trying to memorize every crack and dent. The silence of the room was almost suffocating, filled with memories and things left unsaid. Outside, the distant hum of the city barely penetrated the heavy stillness within these four walls. Suddenly, the soft click of the front door echoed through the apartment. Laura's heart tightened, her eyes instinctively turning toward the entrance. Tom stepped inside quietly, shoulders slumped, exhaustion written across his face. Without a word, he moved toward the table and set his cup down with a delicate clink. It was the same motion she had witnessed countless times before, a small ritual that now felt more like a barrier between them. Laura watched him carefully, her gaze searching for any sign of the man she once knew. But his eyes remained distant, clouded with a sadness that words could no longer reach. The silence stretched between them like a vast, invisible gulf. She wanted to speak, to break the heavy atmosphere. But the right words seemed trapped behind an invisible wall, swallowed by years of quiet withdrawal. Her thoughts spiraled inward, a storm of regret and fear. He slipping away, further each day, like a light dimming at the edge of her world. The warmth they once shared had faded into cold routine and empty gestures. She longed to hold on to the past, the laughter, the shared dreams. But those moments now felt like fragile memories, barely holding together. The city lights outside began to twinkle, indifferent to the pain that filled the room. Laura folded her hands tightly in her lap, trying to steady her trembling heart. The evening deepened, dragging with it a crushing weight of loneliness. Time moved slowly, each tick of the clock marking the widening distance between them. Yet, she remained rooted to her chair, silently hoping for a spark of connection that might never come. The faint glow of a memory began to stir in Laura's mind. A time when laughter filled this very room, when Tom's eyes sparkled with life and hope. She remembered the nights they spent singing under the rain, their voices mingling with the storm, carefree and unafraid. The past seemed like a distant dream, one she wasn't sure she could ever return to. But slowly, things had changed. It started with small moments. The first time Tom didn't answer her simple hello, a crack in their fragile bond. She remembered how he began to fall asleep on the couch instead of their bed, a subtle sign of the distance growing between them. The warmth in his touch faded, replaced by cold indifference. Laura's heart ached as she recalled the gradual shift, the creeping silence that wrapped itself around their lives like a thick fog. The man she loved was still there, but hidden behind walls of exhaustion and withdrawal. She wondered where he went when he disappeared into himself, what shadows haunted his mind. The room around her seemed to shrink with the weight of these memories. She longed for a sign that the man she knew still existed beneath the surface. But the more she looked, the more elusive he became. Their home, once a sanctuary, now felt like a silent prison. Days blurred together as Tom's presence became more fleeting. He left the house earlier in the morning and returned late at night, his steps heavy and quiet. Laura noticed the pattern, but dared not ask too many questions. Fear kept her silent, fear of the answers she might not want to hear. Her mind wandered to darker possibilities. Was there someone else? A hidden life beyond the walls of their home? Or was he simply exhausted, drowning in troubles she couldn't understand? She tried to convince herself it was the latter, clinging to hope amid growing uncertainty. At times, she caught glimpses of a man she barely recognized, withdrawn, distracted, lost in thought. His laughter was rare, his smiles forced. Laura's own world shrank as she retreated into silence, trying to preserve what little remained of their connection. The gap between them widened, filled with unspoken fears and unanswered questions. Laura felt like a stranger in her own home, watching as her marriage slowly unraveled into shadows and silence. Tom's belongings remained exactly where he had left them, his coat hanging on the hook by the door, his keys carelessly tossed onto the table, and his worn shoes neatly placed beside the entrance. It was as if the world around Laura refused to move on, frozen in a moment that no longer existed. But what disturbed her the most wasn't the stillness of his things, but the growing emptiness she saw in his eyes. Each day, Tom's gaze lost more of its spark. The light that once shone brightly, full of warmth and promise, was now dim and flickering, like a candle struggling against the wind. Laura watched him drink water incessantly, his hand often clutching his side as if trying to suppress a silent pain that refused to be voiced. Sometimes she thought she caught a wince, a slight grimace, but he never admitted to feeling unwell. He avoided looking at her directly, his eyes flitting away like a bird startled by its own shadow. His laughter, once frequent and comforting, became a rarity, replaced by a quiet withdrawal that left Laura feeling isolated and helpless. The man she loved was fading, slipping through her fingers like grains of sand. She tried to reach out, to touch the man beneath the surface, but every attempt was met with a wall of silence. The quiet desperation in their home grew heavier by the day, suffocating all hope of reclaiming what they once had. Laura's heart ached as she realized that Tom's disappearance wasn't physical. He was still there, but a ghost of the man she once knew. Every evening, Laura prepared herself for the conversation that never came. She rehearsed the words silently in her mind, over and over again. "If you want to leave, just tell me. I can bear it better than silence." But when Tom sat across from her, the words died on her lips, swallowed by the thick, heavy air that filled the room. She imagined how the conversation might start. A hesitant question, a whispered confession, a moment of raw honesty. She pictured herself holding his hands, looking deep into his eyes, searching for a glimmer of the man she once knew. But reality was far crueler. The silence between them was deafening, a barrier built from months of pain and fear. Each night, she promised herself she would speak up tomorrow. Tomorrow, she whispered to the darkness. But the next evening, the same silence returned, stronger and more impenetrable. Laura's hope dwindled, replaced by a growing sense of despair. The words she longed to hear were replaced by the echo of her own broken promises. Her heart shattered a little more with every missed chance, every conversation left unspoken. She felt trapped in a prison of her own fears, desperate to break free but unable to find the key. The silence was no longer just absence of sound. It had become a living, breathing entity that consumed them both. One afternoon turned into evening, and Tom still hadn't come home. The clock ticked loudly in the quiet apartment, each second stretching out like an unbearable weight. Laura paced the floor, glancing repeatedly at the door, hoping for the sound of his footsteps. But there was nothing, only the heavy silence that settled over the room like a suffocating fog. The night deepened, swallowing the light and hope that had flickered faintly within her. Her phone lay on the table, buzzing intermittently, but she resisted answering. The unknown was worse than any possibility she could imagine. Hours passed until, in the pale light of dawn, the phone finally rang with a call that shattered everything. The voice on the other end was calm, almost mechanical, devoid of warmth or emotion. It delivered news Laura wasn't prepared for, a finality she could neither accept nor comprehend. The silence that had once been a source of frustration transformed into a deafening void, one she could no longer escape. Laura felt as if she had been ripped from the fabric of her own life, tossed into a nightmare where time moved in cruel loops. The world she knew was gone, replaced by an endless echo of loss and sorrow. And through it all, the silence between her and Tom remained, now forever unbreakable. Laura stepped into the room that had once been filled with laughter, love, and life. Now it was a silent shrine to what had been lost. The cup Tom had left on the table remained untouched, a frozen moment in time. The chair was pushed back just slightly, as if he might return at any second. But she knew better. She knew he would never come back. The emptiness that surrounded her was suffocating, wrapping around her like a cold, unyielding blanket. Every corner of the room whispered memories, each one a dagger to her heart. The absence was more painful than any words could describe, a void that swallowed her whole. She sank into the chair, tears streaming down her face as the weight of loss crushed her spirit. No goodbye, no explanation, just silence. Sometimes she thought, the hardest things to bear are those left unsaid, the things that hang in the air like ghosts, haunting the spaces between them. Days later, a small package arrived from the hospital. Laura opened it with trembling hands, finding Tom's belongings carefully wrapped inside. Alongside his clothes and personal items was a folded piece of paper, the familiar handwriting stirring a fresh wave of pain. The note read simply, "I didn't want you to be afraid. Forgive me." It was a quiet confession, a final apology from a man who had carried his burden silently. The medical report included a grim timeline, weeks counted down until the inevitable end, a truth Tom had faced alone. Laura clutched the note to her chest, tears spilling freely as she read and reread the words. The weight of understanding settled over her. He had known all along, and in his silence, he had tried to protect her from the fear she would never have to face. The house felt emptier than ever, but somehow in the ache of loss, Laura found a bittersweet solace. The love they shared hadn't vanished. It had transformed into memories she would carry forever.